Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll take up is related to the micro, small and medium enterprises, as the government will be examining the compliance burden upon the MSMEs due to the Iran-Israel-US war, as the MSMEs are facing the increased compliance burden due to shipping disruptions and the consequent delays. The second article is related to the India-UAE relations, as the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will be visiting UAE in a bid to boost energy security for India. Additionally, we'll take up 5 articles in the prelims pointer section which will be helpful for your prelims preparation. The first article is related to the micro, small and medium enterprises, as the government is examining the increased compliance burden upon the MSMEs due to the Iran-Israel-US war. Because due to the war, the MSMEs are facing shipping disruptions and therefore there are consequent delays in the logistics, increased compliance burden, increased paperwork. For example, when a cargo is diverted, then either it has to be stored in a warehouse somewhere or it has to be transported back to the factory, therefore again increasing the paperwork also and the logistics cost also. So we will discuss the significance of the MSMEs for the Indian economy, the challenges that the MSMEs face, the government initiatives taken up to boost the MSMEs and a few suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. First, let's start with some facts. How are MSMEs defined in India? The micro, small and medium enterprises are defined on the basis of the investment and turnover. As per the revised criteria, the investment has to be less than 2.5 crores for it to be termed as a micro enterprise, and the investment has to be between 2.5 crore to 25 crores for it to be a small enterprise, and from 25 crores to 125 crores of investment means it is a medium enterprise. Similarly, the criteria is also based upon the turnover as well. If the turnover is less than 10 crores per annum, then it will be a micro enterprise, and from 10 to 100 crores it will be a small enterprise, and from 100 to 500 crores turnover per year it will be a medium enterprise. Now, what is the significance of the MSMEs? Why do we need them? Firstly, they are functioning like a growth engine for the Indian economy. They are creating employment. They are helping us in boosting exports from India, therefore earning the forex reserves, the precious forex reserves for India with which we buy oil and gas, we import our energy needs. They contribute to our economy, the GDP growth. For example, the gross value added, the approximate contribution to the GVA in India's GDP is approximately 30% over a period of last 3 to 4 years per annum. Similarly, it contributes significantly to the exports also, contributing about 45% of the exports. That is, about 45% of the exports from India is coming from the MSME produce, whether it is products or services. And over the past 5 years, it has increased almost 3 times. Similarly, in terms of manufacturing, 36% of the products are coming from the MSMEs. They are a significant contributor in the rural development, the rural employment also. They employ about 7.5 crore people in India directly and indirectly. Therefore, the MSMEs, they are the second largest employment provider in India after the agriculture sector, which is the largest employment provider for India. Similarly, they help us in achieving our objective of social inclusion as well, because about 2/3 of the MSMEs, they are owned by the people belonging to the backward classes, therefore helping us in ensuring social inclusion and social justice. Plus, they are a helpful tool in promoting innovation as well, because they are invested in the R&D as well, therefore promoting the number of patents filed from India. Now, since the MSMEs are so significant for the Indian economy, let's observe what are the steps that the government has taken to boost the MSME sector in India. First, let us look at the budgetary allocations. The budgetary outlay towards the MSMEs has been increasing continuously over the past 5-6 years. If you look at the specific measures taken by the budget 26-27 in terms of equity support, the budget announced the creation of an SME growth fund, a small and medium enterprises growth fund of 10,000 crore rupees. Similarly, it announced a top up of 2,000 crore rupees for the Self-Reliant India Fund. Also, to ensure liquidity support for the MSMEs, it was announced that more than 7 lakh crore rupees was made available for the MSMEs through the TRADES platform. The TRADES is the Trade Receivables Discounting System, through which the MSMEs can get access to the capital which they need for the working capital. Suppose they have provided their products or services to a third party for which they have certain receivables. They have not yet received the payment from that third party. Then they can sell their trade receivables to a bank or a non-banking financial company. In return, the bank or the NBFC will give the money to the MSMEs that they can use as working capital, while the bank or the NBFC will receive the trade receivables from that third party which received the products or services from the MSMEs. Similarly, to ensure that the MSMEs get professional support also, the budget 26-27 announced the formation of a cadre of corporate mitras in tier 2 and tier 3 towns, which will help the MSMEs in meeting the compliance requirements at the affordable costs. Let's observe the measures taken up by the earlier budget 25-26 also to ensure that they get loans easily through the formal channels. It announced that the credit guarantee cover for the MSMEs will be significantly enhanced. For example, for the micro and small enterprises, it was increased from 5 crore to 10 crore, and the additional credit of 1.5 lakh crore rupees will be made available over a period of 5 years. For the startups also, it was increased from 10 crores to 20 crores. Similarly, customized credit cards were provided for the micro enterprises which were registered on the Udyam portal, and through these credit cards they will be able to get loans of up to 5 lakh rupees, and 10 lakh cards were to be issued in the first year itself. Similarly, to ensure that the entrepreneurship is also promoted, the new MSMEs are also promoted, it announced the establishment of a new fund of funds for the startups, and a fresh contribution of another 10,000 crores was announced in addition to the existing government contribution of 10,000 crore rupees. Similarly, the budget 25-26 even announced a new scheme for the 5 lakh women, scheduled castes and scheduled tribes first time entrepreneurs. To encourage that they enter into the entrepreneurship, term loans were provided up to 2 crore rupees during the 5-year period. Now, the budget 2025 even established the export promotion mission, specifically targeting the MSMEs. Through the export promotion mission, the export credit will be provided to the MSMEs. Also, export factoring support will be provided to the MSMEs. What is export factoring? It means, for example, the MSMEs have certain receivables, the foreign account receivables. Then they can also receive that by selling it to a third party bank or financial institutions also, and in return they get the money immediately. Similarly, they were also promised support for overcoming the tariff and non-tariff barriers which were imposed by the other countries, essentially boosting export from the MSMEs from India. And the focus was also given on the labor intensive sectors. For example, the budget 25 focused upon the focus product scheme, which promotes two sectors, especially the footwear sector and the leather sector, which comprise the most employment intensive sectors also. And a new scheme was also announced for the toy sector, because the budget 25 proposed that we want to make India as a toy manufacturing hub, and we want to ensure that there is skill development in the toy manufacturing in India, and also promoting the cluster development in the toy manufacturing in India, so that there is economy of scale which can be utilized and the cost of production will come down if there are cluster of the industries at the same place. Similarly, it announced the setting up of a National Institute of Food Technology, Entrepreneurship and Management, specifically for boosting manufacturing and clean technology related MSMEs. It announced a national manufacturing mission focused upon the MSMEs, and emphasis was put upon the photovoltaic cells manufacturing, which will come to India's rescue when India has the dire energy crisis. Also, the manufacturing of EV batteries, wind turbines, and therefore focusing upon the renewable energy generation in India, and also therefore meeting India's climate change goals. Additionally, the budget 24-25 had even provided that the limit of mudra loans was increased from 10 lakh rupees to 20 lakh rupees. and the turnover thresholds for the buyers for mandatory onboarding on the TReDS platform, that was also reduced from 500 crores to 250 crores. That is, if the trade receivables are even 250 crores also, then also they can be onboarded onto the TReDS platform, therefore again ensuring the working capital for the MSMEs. Also, the financial support was announced for 50 multi-product food irradiation units in the MSME sector in the budget 2024-2025. Let's observe the other significant initiatives also which were focused upon boosting the MSME sector in India. One of the most important ones is the PM Vishwakarma scheme. Through the PM Vishwakarma scheme, the quality of products and services provided by the MSMEs, that was sought to be increased, also increasing the outreach of the products and services from the MSMEs. For that, the collateral-free loans were provided through the PM Vishwakarma scheme, therefore integrating them into the global value chains. For that, a training was also provided to the MSMEs. A 5-day basic training program was initiated. Similarly, to ensure that the MSMEs, they are integrated into the formal economy, they were registered through the Udyam registration portal, and this was to provide them free, paperless and self-declaration based registration process, therefore formalizing them. And through the PM Employment Generation Program, the MSMEs in the non-farm sector, they were promoted, therefore creating employment also in the non-farm sector. For that, the margin money, the capital subsidy was provided to the beneficiaries who were availing loans for setting up new enterprises through the PM Employment Generation Program. And also, credit linked capital subsidy scheme provided money to them for technology upgradation, and the credit guarantee trust fund for the MSMEs, that also provided the loans which were collateral free. Additionally, to increase the market share and the market access, the Raising and Accelerating MSME Performance Program was taken up, which provided him not only the market access but also the credit access, formal credit access for the MSMEs. Through the Aspire, the business incubators were promoted. Through the Sphurti program, the scheme of fund for the regeneration of the traditional industries, the MSMEs were promoted, particularly the traditional artisans. The traditional artisans, they were sought to be incentivized to form clusters, to form collaterals, etc. And additionally, the public-private partnership was also promoted with the MSMEs through the MSME Sambandh, and therefore about 25% of the procurement which was done by the central departments, central government ministries as well as PSUs, that they were procuring, 25% of their procurement was mandated to come from the MSMEs to boost the MSMEs in India. Similarly, the MSME Smadhan, it provided for the resolution in case there were payment delays, the digital payment delays, etc. And to ensure that there is quality support, improvement of quality for the products and services that the MSMEs provided, the financial support was provided for the zero effect, zero defect certification. And digitalization of MSMEs was also promoted through initiatives like Digital Saksham, Udyam, that is for registration, eShram, that is for the database of the unorganized sector workers in India. And the Supreme Court also in 2024 observed that the banks, they must identify the early signs of stress in the MSME accounts before declaring them as the non-performing assets. Therefore, the bank should take the proactive steps to ensure that they are identifying if there is any stress, upcoming stress in the MSME accounts. But the MSMEs face certain challenges in India. For example, one of the first challenges is that of registration itself. The registration process, it is quite lengthy and cumbersome. We have tried to resolve it by going for self-declaration based registration through the Udyam registration portal. But then comes the credit issue, because most of the MSMEs, they are not able to get access to the credit through the formal channels. As per a report by the Standing Committee on Finance itself, the report named Strengthening Credit Flows to the MSME Sector, just about 16% of the MSMEs are able to get access to the credit through the formal channels. The other MSMEs, they are forced to get credit through the informal channels. Therefore, they often become the victims of loan sharks also, affecting their liquidity and returns. Additionally, there is poor technology adoption, and the reason behind poor technology adoption is the financial constraints. they do not have enough money to employ better technologies. They are mostly engaged in the low skilled manufacturing sector. Therefore, there are skill gaps also because they are not invested in the R&D. They are not investing in R&D and mostly focused upon the low skilled manufacturing. There is poor market access as well. For example, if they are focusing upon the exports, then barriers are imposed by the countries to which they export, the tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, phytosanitary barriers, etc. At the same time, the export support infrastructure that also falls short of supporting the MSMEs, for example, lacking the last mile connectivity. Similarly, there is regulatory compliance burden also. For example, there are frequent changes in the tax laws, changes in the GST slabs also because of policy uncertainty. At the same time, they face infrastructure constraints also. For example, the lack of access to reliable energy supply, reliable power supply. For example, certain MSMEs, they are dependent upon gas. Gas we are importing from Middle East. In the Middle East, there is a choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. Therefore, there is lack of availability of gas. Therefore, it leads to the shutdown of MSMEs. The MSMEs, for example, the poultry industry in Uttar Pradesh, that is being forced to shut down because of the lack of availability of gas. And interestingly, some part of the produce, the poultry that they produce, it was being exported to the Middle East region itself. And at the same time, there are logistical constraints also. For example, the lack of multimodal connectivity, and therefore the operational cost also goes up. Another challenge is that of delayed payments also. The payments that they need to receive from the third parties to which they have sold their products or services, that is delayed. Now, additionally, due to this Iran-Israel-US war, there are disruptions in the shipping as well, which are impacting the MSMEs disproportionately. For example, if the cargo is diverted back, it has to be stored either in a warehouse somewhere for which rent has to be paid, or it has to be taken back to the factory for which the logistics cost has to be paid. Similarly, the shipments, if they get routed to a different port, then it is left to the exporter to figure out the paperwork and the next step. And many destinations, they have tariff quotas also for particular products that get filled out quickly. Now, what are the suggestions that we can give for boosting the MSME sector in India? We can categorize these suggestions under the headers so as to address each challenge. For example, first, to address the issue of credit access. To ensure the access to formal credit for the MSMEs, we can provide them collateral-free loans utilizing technology via fintech companies. Similarly, strict payment timelines can be provided under the MSME Samadhan scheme, so that the trade receivables that they have, the amount that they need to receive from the third parties which have received the products and services from the MSMEs, that payment is done on time. Similarly, to reduce the compliance burden, the clearances can be provided through the single window clearance. For example, registration and MSME coordination council can be established. The GST registration procedure can be simplified. Additionally, to promote the technology adoption by the MSMEs, we can go for the inclusion of cyber security, cloud computing, digital marketing, and the adoption of artificial intelligence and Internet of Things through digital MSME 2.0. Similarly, at the IITs, the premier research institutions in India, innovation and incubation hubs to promote and support the MSMEs can be established. At the same time, the workforce skills can be improved by integrating it to the Skill India program and the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Also, the workforce wages, they also need to increase along with inflation, because the wages, if they become stagnant, then the consumption demand in the economy will also be stagnant, and therefore the economic growth will not happen. At the same time, they need to have some bargaining power also, and therefore the insurance should be provided to the workers of the MSMEs. To address the infrastructure related challenges, we can go for the setting up of industrial parks and clusters, because the cluster based development, it will help us in achieving the economy of scale and therefore bringing down the operational cost as well as the logistics cost also. Now, there is a mains practice question as well. Discuss the challenges faced by the MSME sector in India. Highlight the major government initiatives aimed at supporting the MSMEs and suggest measures to enhance their competitiveness and resilience. Please try to write it. The next article is related to India-UAE relations, as the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar is going to visit UAE in a bid to boost India's energy security. because India imports a large chunk of its oil and natural gas from the Middle East region. We are trying to diversify our energy sources now, but the Middle East has a choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, and UAE is strategically located near the Strait of Hormuz. Therefore, we will discuss the significance of UAE for India, the evolution of India-UAE ties, the challenges in the bilateral relations, and a few suggestions in this regard. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. First, let us look at the map of UAE. UAE is strategically located near the Strait of Hormuz and it shares its boundary with Saudi Arabia and Oman. In 1966, the ruler of Abu Dhabi was Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, and we had cordial ties at the time. In 1971, the Federation of UAE was formed, and we established diplomatic relations with the UAE in 1972. And first time, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi visited UAE in 1981. From 2015 onwards, there have been visits from Prime Minister Modi also and the Crown Prince of UAE as well into India. Let us now observe the evolution of the India-UAE relations, the phases in the India-UAE relations. The first phase, the first era was the mercantile and cultural era, that is before 1971. Before 1971, the ties were not pushed forward through formal diplomatic negotiations, rather it was because of the geographical proximity and Indian trade passing through that region and the UAE gradually becoming a connectivity hub. And before 1966, even the Indian rupee that was treated like a de facto currency in trade there as well. Although after the devaluation of Indian rupee after 1966, they started developing and focusing upon their own local currencies. But from 1971 to 2000 onwards, we can term this phase as the transactional phase, the transactional era in the India-UAE relations. For example, there were oil exports from the Middle East region to India, and there was labor export from India to the Middle East region, and the Indian migrant labor, they were building the Gulf dream. The Indian migrant labor was utilized for building the infrastructure of UAE as well. Although they were not treated like a soft power or the Indian diaspora, rather they were only treated like an economy asset for creation of infrastructure in the UAE. But at the time of the Cold War, there were different alignments. India was slightly seen to be aligned towards USSR, whereas the UAE was more leaned towards the US-Saudi bloc. Therefore, at that time, it was supporting Pakistan in terms of the Kashmir issue at various forums, for example, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation also. Therefore, the security relations, they hit a low point because Dubai was at that time seen like an anti-India hub or as a smuggling hub, smuggling into India. But from 2000 onwards, the phase changed. We term that as an era of benign neglect. From 2000 onwards, there was high trade between India and the Gulf region, India and UAE also. But at the same time, there was lower diplomatic push, lower politics involved. But gradually, from 2002 onwards especially, the image of UAE started changing. Its tactics also started changing. Earlier, it was seen like an anti-India hub. There were anti-India elements there. But after 2002, after the deportation of Aftab Ansari into India, then there was gradual cooperation in terms of counter-terrorism between India and UAE also. From 2015 onwards, we term this era as the golden era in the India-UAE ties. For example, the UAE dehyphenated India and Pakistan. Earlier, during the Cold War time, it was seeing India through the Pakistan lens. But after 2015 onwards especially, it dehyphenated India and Pakistan. For example, it invited India as a guest of honor at the Organization for Islamic Cooperation itself in 2019 despite the protests from Pakistan. Similarly, the partnership grew into a comprehensive strategic partnership and UAE became a connectivity hub. For example, it became on the path of the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, part of I2U2, and also the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement was signed in 2022. Now, what is the significance of UAE for India? It is important from the geo-economic point of view, as in terms of trade, the UAE signed its first Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with India. and also India is its third largest trading partner. Similarly, the UAE is the fourth largest foreign investor in India in fiscal year 2023. Also, 18% of the forex remittances in India were coming from UAE because of the presence of a large Indian diaspora in the UAE going to work there, earn there. And UAE is significant for India's energy security because of its strategic location, and India imports a large chunk of its oil and natural gas from the Middle East region. Also, we have a local currency settlement system in place, that is the trade between the two countries that is settled in the local currencies. And there is fintech collaboration also. For example, RuPay card is accepted in UAE. Also, there is the linking between the UPI and the UAE's equivalent AANI also. From the geostrategic point of view, again UAE is significant because we get access to the Al Dhafra air base and we conduct various joint exercises. There are various joint exercises between India and UAE: Desert Cyclone, Desert Eagle and Jayed Talwar. Also, we need to counter the ISIS recruitments from that region for the theatre of war, and it is important for connectivity as well. For example, part of the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. Also, from a geopolitical point of view, UAE is significant. For example, we need cooperation in the various multilateral fora like United Nations Security Council. We want a permanent seat. UAE can give us one more vote, being part of I2U2, etc. And not only in the multilateral but also in the regional groupings where India is not even a member, UAE can protect our interests if we have cooperation. For example, the Gulf Cooperation Council decisions or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, there India is not a member but India's interests can be protected by UAE. Similarly, for the people to people ties, UAE is significant because we have a large Indian diaspora in UAE. There is the establishment of various Indian educational campuses in UAE, even the building of temples also in UAE. But there are certain challenges in the India-UAE relations. For example, the kafala system of UAE. Through the kafala system, the visa, it is tied to the jobs, to the employer himself. If you lose your job in UAE, then you will be deported back. So when a person is going to UAE for working there, their passports are often confiscated by their employers and they are kept in inhumane conditions. Their wages are delayed, they are denied. Therefore, there should be the abolition of the kafala system, that India can insist upon that the visas, they should not be employer linked, that the migrant workers, they are left to the mercy of their employers. Similarly, there is the Chinese checkbook diplomacy. For example, the Chinese investments in UAE, they are far more than India's investments in UAE. For example, from 2005 to 2020, Chinese investments in UAE were about $30 billion. Similarly, there are regional conflicts where both India and UAE have their own stands. For example, with respect to Iran, with respect to Palestine, etc., and the recent war. And UAE has also provided loans to Pakistan in the past, although recently it has asked Pakistan to repay it immediately because of the ties between UAE and Pakistan turning sour. And there is a significant trade deficit as well between India and UAE. Trade deficit about $12 billion as of fiscal year 2024. And there are various non-tariff barriers which are imposed by UAE upon India's exports to UAE. For example, the sanitary and phytosanitary barriers and technical barriers upon the export of poultry products, meat products from India to UAE. Let's also observe some of the recent agreements that were signed between India and UAE. The two countries signed a cooperation MOU regarding the nuclear energy cooperation for the operation and maintenance of nuclear power plants, sourcing of nuclear goods and services from India, and a long-term LNG, liquefied natural gas supply agreement. Also the building of a strategic petroleum reserve, for that there will be cooperation, and the production concession agreement for Abu Dhabi onshore block 1 between Urja Bharat and the ADNOC. Additionally, there was agreement with the Gujarat government also by UAE to set up food parks in India with cooperation from the UAE. Now, what are the suggestions that we can give for improving the bilateral ties between India and UAE? First, we can leverage our good relations with UAE for building better ties with the countries of that region, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and also getting the access to the market. the market of the Greater Arab Free Trade Area, for example, or the access to the Africa market, because UAE is like a connectivity hub and it can help us in getting access to the market of the countries of that region. Similarly, we can establish a 2+2 dialogue so that the decision making at the highest level, it is fast tracked. We can go for sectoral collaboration in specific sectors, for example, building a green hydrogen grid. Similarly, the building of co-production defense industrial base. Additionally, we can fast track the arbitration mechanisms to resolve disputes. For example, the sovereign fast track arbitration mechanism, like establishing a dispute resolution mechanism within the gift city of Gujarat. Also, we can create a rupee dirham corporate bond market. It will help us in resolving the local currency settlement system liquidity trap. The trade between India and UAE, that is settled through the local currencies. But India imports more from UAE and UAE imports less from India. Therefore, the UAE investors, they are left with a lot of Indian rupees that they are not able to utilize for purchasing anything. Therefore, we can promote the selling of Indian masala bonds or the Indian green infrastructure bonds in the rupee dirham corporate bond market in UAE, and these are high return, high yield bonds also. Additionally, we can insist UAE for reforming the kafala system or altogether abolishing it or addressing India's concerns with respect to it. Similarly, we can push for transparency in the non-tariff barriers that UAE imposes upon the exports from India. Also, we can improve relations with UAE through the focus through extended neighborhood and the look west policy of India. There is a means practice question also. Examine the importance of India-UAE ties in ensuring India's energy, economic and strategic interests in the backdrop of the ongoing Iran-Israel-US conflict in West Asia. Discuss the challenges in this partnership and suggest measures to strengthen it in a volatile environment. Please try to write it. The next article is related to espionage and internal security. As an espionage network linked to the ISI and Babbar Khalsa International was busted in Delhi and Punjab. This is important in GS3 under the topic Challenges to Internal Security through Communication Networks. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few basics about espionage. Espionage is to steal data. It can be business data, financial data, or commercial data. It can also be to steal the security related data that can compromise the national security. The economic data is stolen to gain competitive advantage over the other country. And in the digital era, there are newer challenges which are emerging. For example, there is cyber surveillance which is used, and China especially has moved more towards the cyber espionage rather than sending agents for the physical espionage, and even the social media is also used for the espionage activities. And therefore, there are state-sponsored hacking syndicates also. For example, you might have heard about Red Echo, Stone Panda, Black Tech, etc. They were utilized to ensure that they are skirting attribution so that it becomes difficult to attribute from where the attack is coming if it is cyber espionage. Similarly, there are economic objectives. When it is coming from the side of China, they want to boost their manufacturing sector. Therefore, they are stealing our data related to the manufacturing sector. And we have geopolitical rivalries. To our northern side also, to our western side also, we have geopolitical rivals. Therefore, they send spywares to India. For example, in 2016, Pakistani handlers, they sent the Smash app spyware to the phones of the Indian Army officials to track the call logs, to track their movement, GPS, etc. And therefore, the classified information is stolen. For example, the information related to troop deployment, troop movement, counter-terrorism operations, weapon systems that India deploys. And it is not only Pakistan and China which target India with respect to espionage. Even USA and North Korea have also targeted India for the espionage activities. One aspect is economic espionage. What is economic espionage? As per Mark Danielson, it is an act of deliberate acquisition of confidential information from domestic companies and government entities to benefit a foreign state. And there is a newer challenge, which is that the economic espionage, this is also state sponsored now. For example, the Chinese, they are targeting critical sectors in India, targeting the defense sector, power sector, healthcare sector, and the pharma industry of India, stealing their information, even the IP theft. the intellectual property rights theft, and it has been noted even by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute study that the Chinese have a significant role in the IP theft not only in India but across the globe. And now they may even target the Chinese hackers, they may target even the startup innovation ecosystem of India as well. As per a report of the Law Commission of India, the Trade Secrets and Economic Espionage report, it is difficult to decipher the extent to which the espionage is happening because of the shroud, because of the secrecy, and the reporting often conflates the economic espionage, commercial espionage, and business espionage. Now, who are the major players involved in espionage activities against India? It is China and Pakistan only. Let's also observe some of their espionage related activities. In 2012, the Chinese targeted the Indian Navy's Eastern Naval Command. Its data was breached. Similarly, in 2015, they engaged with the APT-30. It was almost a decade-long operation through which they were monitoring the Indian Navy's activity in the South China Sea, and they were also tracking India's relations with its South Asian neighbors. Early 2020s, there was the attack through the Red Echo. That was the attack targeting the power sector organizations, crippling the power infrastructure. In March 2021, there was the attack using the APT-10 or the Stone Panda. That was an attack on the vaccine manufacturers to steal their data, the data of the Bharat Biotech and the Serum Institute of India, to steal their intellectual property. Similarly, in August 2021, there was an attack on Air India, and in September 2021, there was an attack by the Red Echo on the Times Group. Even the UIDAI as well, the Aadhaar data was allegedly stolen, and the Madhya Pradesh police also. Even the power grids in India have been targeted by the Chinese. The Ladakh power grid during the border standoff and the Mumbai outage, that was also attributed to the Chinese attacks. Similarly, Pakistan has also been attacking India through the espionage activities. For example, the Reverse Rat 2.0 malware in 2021, that was to attack the government organizations and their websites. APT-36 since 2016, that was used to fake the COVID-19 health advisories for phishing attacks against the Indian military. Pakistan also employs the honey trap activities in the cyberspace. For example, a senior engineer at DRDO was charged for divulging the information regarding the classified weapons development as well. Now, how do we tackle the threat? First, there is the challenge that we need to attribute it to the specific actor. We need to find the source of the attack. Because there are state-sponsored hacking syndicates, and because of the covert nature, it becomes difficult to attribute that attack to a source. And with the advent of the artificial intelligence, the attribution becomes even more difficult because the information is collected silently and in a layered format. Therefore, we need to have a proactive government response to protect the businesses and companies also, along with the focus on the national security. And we can take up legal measures. For example, the Law Commission in 2024 recommended that we need to have a separate law to prevent the economic espionage, and we can have the measures for the broader cyber threats also fine-tuned towards the espionage activities. For example, the National Cyber Security Coordinator, National Critical Infrastructure Information Protection Center, and the Defense Cyber Agency also. Now, coming to the article, the Delhi police has dismantled an interstate terror, arms smuggling and espionage module allegedly backed by Pakistan-based operatives linked to the Babbar Khalsa International and the ISI. They were installing the solar-powered CCTV cameras near the sensitive defense establishments and security establishments, and the funds were transferred to them via UPI accounts, and they were used to support the espionage operations, recruit members, and install surveillance equipment near the high security zones. This was utilizing the radicalized people and recruiting them further to carry out the subversive activities, including planned grenade attacks on the security establishments in future, which were foiled through this. The next article is related to Gaganyaan. This is important in GS3 under the topic Achievements of Indians in Science and Technology. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few facts regarding Gaganyaan. Gaganyaan is a 3-day manned mission that we are planning to send to the low Earth orbit of 400 kilometers with a crew of 3 people. It will be a manned mission, sending the humans to space. The objectives are that we will be demonstrating our capability for carrying out human space flights, sending humans to space and going for space exploration. Additionally, we will be able to conduct microgravity experiments. the experiments that we can conduct in space. And the Gaganyaan mission comprises of an orbital module which comprises of a crew module and a service module. The components include a human-rated launch vehicle Mark III. It is a modified version of the launch vehicle Mark III, which was earlier named as the GSLV Mark III, and it has a three-stage propulsion system comprising of the solid stage, liquid stage and cryogenic stage, and it comprises of a crew escape system plus the orbital module. The orbital module comprises of the crew module plus the service module. The crew module will be the space in which the astronauts will be inhabiting, the habitable space with Earth-like environment. It will have all the control systems for the mission, the crew communication, navigation, guidance and avionics systems. And it is also designed that it will survive during the re-entry as well, as we need to bring the humans back to Earth for re-entry to the Earth atmosphere. Additionally, attached with it is a service module. It provides the necessary support to the crew module while they are in the orbit. This is not a pressurized structure, this is unpressurized structure containing the propulsion system, thermal system, power systems and the avionics. Before launching the Gaganyaan, there are various tests which will be conducted. The first of the tests will be the integrated airdrop test, which was conducted by the ISRO. After that, there will be test vehicle missions, pad abort test, unmanned flight, and then only finally we'll be sending the manned flight. Now, what is the significance of the Gaganyaan mission? First, we'll be able to demonstrate our technological capability, we'll be able to explore the solar system in future, and we'll be able to conduct the sample return missions also, where we'll be able to collect samples from the extraterrestrial bodies and bring them back to Earth for analysis. Will be able to inspire the youth through the success of such missions, who will also be encouraged to participate in research and development for innovation. And in foreign policy also it will become a good tool, because we'll be able to go for collaborations for joint missions if we can demonstrate success, and we can also go for knowledge exchange, international partnerships, and the scientific breakthroughs will also be achieved. For example, we can conduct the microgravity environment experiments, and it may lead to discoveries in the fields of medicine, material science, etc. And it will also ultimately lead to economic growth and employment generation, because it will lead to the development of the space related industries in India. Now, coming to the article, ISRO has completed the second integrated airdrop test at the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota, Andhra Pradesh. A simulated crew module in which the astronauts sit during the human flight during re-entry and landing was lifted by an Indian Air Force Chinook helicopter to an altitude of about 3 kilometers and released over a designated drop zone in the sea. The crew module was subsequently successfully recovered. The IADT-02 test validates the parachute-based deceleration systems in the crew module, which successfully functioned. The next article is related to Jyotirao Phule. This is important in prelims under the topic History of India and Indian National Movement. Before coming to the article, let's discuss a few facts regarding Jyotirao Govindrao Phule. He was a social reformer, educator and writer from Maharashtra. He was born in Maharashtra on April 11, 1827, and he got his education at Scottish Mission High School. He had a personal experience of facing caste-based discrimination at a friend's wedding. Therefore, it became his inspiration, and he took up a lifelong fight against social injustices. His wife was Savitribai Phule, who was also his partner and India's first female teacher, and they established the first school for girls in Pune. Now, let's also observe some of his contributions. In the education field, he established the schools for girls and marginalized communities. He also founded night schools for the working class people to ensure the spread of education. He took up social reforms, for example, establishing of Satyashodak Samaj. He founded this Society of Truth Seekers in 1873 to promote social equality and to challenge the caste oppression. Additionally, he took up issues related to women's rights. For example, he advocated for widow remarriage. He was against child marriage. He was also against female infanticide. He had various literary contributions. For example, he wrote Gulamgiri, that is slavery, critiquing therefore the caste oppression. He also wrote Shetkariyacha Asood, that is cultivator's whip, exposing the farmers' exploitation by the upper caste landlords. He was also a critic of the orthodoxy spread by the Brahmins, as he was in favor of the abolition of the caste system for ensuring achieving true social justice. Now coming to the article, Jyotirao Phule began by attacking the ideological roots of the caste. He refused to accept that hierarchy was divinely ordained. Instead, he located it in history, conquest and systematic subjugation of the majority by a minority that monopolized both knowledge and power. In Gulamgiri, he wrote with striking force that the condition of the Shudras and Ati Shudras is not very different from that of the slaves in America. Phule did not stop at caste only. His critique also extended to the critique of the economic structure in the society. In Shetkariyacha Asud, he turned his attention to the peasantry and exposed the mechanisms of exploitation that governed the agrarian life. Equally central was his understanding of patriarchy as well, because along with Savitribai Phule, he opened the doors of education to women at a time when the society was hostile to this idea. The next article is related to the impeachment of the judges of higher judiciary in India and the in-house inquiry mechanism. This is important in prelims under the topic Indian Polity and Governance Constitution. So how does the impeachment procedure work in India? The word impeachment is not used explicitly anywhere in the constitution. The judges can be removed on the grounds of proved misbehavior or incapacity, and the removal is provided for under Article 124 Clause 4 of the Indian Constitution with the detailed procedure under the Judges Enquiry Act 1968. Now, how does the process work? First, a motion has to be introduced. A motion for removal has to be introduced in either house of the parliament, either in the Lok Sabha or in the Rajya Sabha. For the introduction of the motion, there has to be a support of at least 100 MPs of the Lok Sabha if it is introduced in the Lok Sabha, or if it is introduced in the Rajya Sabha, then there has to be a support of at least 50 Rajya Sabha members for its introduction. Now, the further proceeding will happen only if the motion is accepted by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha or the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha, otherwise the procedure stops there. Then an inquiry committee will be established. This inquiry committee will be a 3-member committee. It will be established under the Judges Enquiry Act 1968. It will comprise of a Supreme Court judge or the Chief Justice of India, also a Chief Justice of a High Court and an eminent jurist. This committee will be functioning like a fact-finding body. It will conduct a quasi-judicial inquiry into the charges levelled against the judge, and its report will be accessible to the parliament, and there will be a debate in the parliament. If the judge is found guilty, then the motion is debated, and if it is passed in both houses by a special majority, that is 2/3 of the members present and voting, and also the absolute majority of the total membership, then only the president will issue a final removal order. Now, there is an in-house inquiry procedure also, which the Supreme Court introduced in 1999 because of the C. Ravichandran Iyer versus Justice A.M. Bhattacharjee case in 1995, where it was exposed that there is no mechanism to deal with the judicial misconduct, where the misconduct is falling below the misconduct of the impeachment threshold. Therefore, this in-house inquiry procedure bridges that gap between the minor misconduct and proved misbehavior. Proved misbehavior will become a ground of impeachment itself, but what about the minor misconduct? For that, the complaints, if received against a judge, they will be screened. The screening of the complaints will be done by the Chief Justice of that High Court if it is a judge of a High Court, or the Chief Justice of India if it is the judge of the Supreme Court. And then the inquiry committee will be constituted. A 3-member inquiry committee will be constituted. If it is a High Court judge against whom the allegations are levelled, then the inquiry committee will comprise of 2 Chief Justices of the other High Courts, not the same High Court, plus 1 High Court judge. If it is the allegation against a Chief Justice of a High Court, then the inquiry committee will comprise of 1 Supreme Court judge and 2 Chief Justices of the High Courts. And if it is an inquiry against a Supreme Court judge, then 3 Supreme Court judges will be part of the inquiry committee. And if it is the allegation against the Chief Justice of India, then there is no specific in-house procedure as of now. This inquiry will be ensuring the principles of natural justice are not violated. Therefore, they will also afford the opportunity to the judge against whom the charges are levelled to explain himself. The outcomes will be, if there is proved misconduct, then the judge may be advised to resign, or he may be advised to take the voluntary retirement from service. If the judge refuses from resigning or taking voluntary retirement, then he may be relieved of the judicial duties by the Chief Justice of that High Court or the Chief Justice of India, or the Chief Justice of India may even recommend the impeachment of that judge. And if it is only a minor misconduct, then that judge will be cautioned and the report will be placed on record. The next article is related to constitutional morality. This is important in prelims under the topic Indian polity and governance, constitution. The constitutional morality means the adherence to the principles and values enshrined in the constitution. As per George Grote, it means a paramount reverence for the forms of the constitution. Therefore, there has to be a respect for the political institutions and procedures in a democratic polity. Also, there has to be a freedom to the citizens for criticizing those who are in power, therefore holding them accountable. The spirit of constitutional morality, it is reflected in various provisions of the constitution, although it has not been explicitly mentioned, the constitutional morality in the constitution. The spirit is reflected, for example, in preamble, which demonstrates our core democratic values, for example, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. The part 3 of the constitution, the enforcement of the fundamental rights, for example, through the article 32, the writ jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The part 4, the directive principles, which are fundamental in the governance of the country. They are non-justiciable, but nevertheless they are fundamental in the governance as per Article 37. Similarly, Part 4A, the fundamental duties, and also the system of checks and balances through which no organ of the government can usurp the power of another organ. Now let's also observe the observations of the Supreme Court through a few cases regarding the constitutional morality. In the Naz Foundation versus Government of NCT in 2009, the Supreme Court observed that the constitutional values, they must take preference over the popular morality. In Manoj Narula versus Union of India in 2014, the court observed that bowing down to the constitutional norms is required. That is constitutional morality, and we need to ensure that the governance is free from arbitrariness. In Puttaswamy versus Union of India, the court linked the concept of constitutional morality to the rule of law and individual dignity. Therefore, it observed that the state cannot take that away. In Navtej Singh Johar case in 2018, the Supreme Court observed that there has to be a right to privacy and dignity for the LGBT community as well, and therefore we need a pluralistic and inclusive society which can uphold the constitutional values. In the Sabrimala case, that is the Young Indian Lawyers Association case in 2018, the court observed that the word public morality under Article 25 must yield to constitutional morality. Therefore, the women's right to equality must be upheld in the religious spaces, allowing the temple entry to women in the Sabrimala temple. In NCT of Delhi versus Union of India case, the court observed that constitutional morality beyond adherence to text. It does not mean only the literal application of law, it has to be the application in spirit also. Also, the cooperative federalism, the respect for institutions and deliberative governance all form part of the constitutional morality. Thank you.